The burnt smell hit Beatrice Ashford's nose before she even opened the oven door, and she knew with a sinking feeling that she had ruined yet another meal in her aunt's kitchen. She pulled out the blackened biscuits with shaking hands, tears already threatening to spill down her cheeks as Aunt Margaret's heavy footsteps approached from the hallway of their modest home in Idaho City, Idaho. "Sweet mercy, child, what have you done now?" Aunt Margaret's voice cut through the smoky kitchen like a knife through butter. The older woman swept into the room, her gray hair pulled back in its customary severe bun, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. "She cannot cook anything right, not a single blessed thing." Beatrice set the ruined biscuits on the counter, her hands trembling. At 20 years old, she should have mastered the basics of cooking by now, but somehow every attempt ended in disaster. The biscuits were charcoal, the stew she had made yesterday had been so salty it was inedible, and the chicken she had roasted 2 days ago had been raw in the middle despite being burnt on the outside. "I am sorry, Aunt Margaret," Beatrice whispered, wiping her flour-covered hands on her apron. "I truly tried to follow the recipe exactly as you wrote it. Trying is not good enough." Aunt Margaret snatched up the pan of ruined biscuits and dumped them into the waste bucket with a clatter. "How am I ever going to find you a husband when you cannot even prepare a simple breakfast? No man wants a wife who will starve him to death or poison him with her cooking." Beatrice felt the familiar sting of shame wash over her. She had been living with Aunt Margaret for 3 years now, ever since her parents had died of fever during a particularly harsh winter. Her aunt had taken her in out of duty rather than love, and she never let Beatrice forget what a burden she was. "Perhaps I could help with the sewing instead," Beatrice offered quietly. "Or the washing." "The washing and sewing do not fill a man's belly," Aunt Margaret snapped. She grabbed her shawl from the hook by the door. "I am going to the mercantile to purchase more flour since you have wasted half a bag on those disaster biscuits. When I return, you will clean this kitchen until it sparkles, and then you will practice making bread. Simple bread, Beatrice. Even a child can manage that." The door slammed behind Aunt Margaret, leaving Beatrice alone in the smoky kitchen. She slumped against the counter, fighting back tears. It was not that she did not try. She followed recipes carefully, measured ingredients precisely, and watched the oven temperature with eagle eyes. Yet somehow, everything she touched in the kitchen turned to ruin. The year was 1878, and Idaho City was still a bustling mining town, though not as wild as it had been during the height of the gold rush. The town had settled into a rhythm of commerce and community, with proper shops, a church, and even a schoolhouse. But for Beatrice, it felt like a prison where her failures were on constant display. She was opening the windows to let out the smoke when she heard a commotion outside. Curious, she wiped her hands and stepped onto the small porch. A crowd had gathered near the general store, and people were whispering and pointing toward the edge of town. "That is him," old Mrs. Henderson was saying to her companion. "That mountain man who lives up in the high country, comes down maybe twice a year for supplies." Beatrice shaded her eyes against the bright September sun and looked where everyone was pointing. Even from a distance, the man was impressive. He sat atop a massive bay horse, his broad shoulders blocking out the sun behind him. He had long, dark hair that fell past his shoulders, and even at this distance, she could see the powerful muscles of his arms as he dismounted in one fluid motion. "Lucas Anderson," another voice said nearby. "They say he wrestled a bear with his bare hands and won. I heard he can track anything that moves through those mountains," someone else added. "And that he once carried a full-grown elk on his shoulders for 5 miles. Beatrice found herself staring, fascinated despite herself. The man moved with a quiet confidence as he tied his horse to the hitching post outside the general store. He wore buckskin clothing, well worn and practical, and had a rifle strapped to his back. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with a strong jaw covered in dark stubble. "Beatrice Ashford, get back in that kitchen this instant." She jumped at Aunt Margaret's sharp voice. Her aunt had returned from the mercantile, her face pinched with disapproval. Gawking at strange men like some common trollop, what would people think? "I was just watching with everyone else," Beatrice protested, but she obediently retreated into the house. Through the window, however, she could still see the mountain man as he conducted his business in town. There was something about him that captured her attention, something wild and free that called to a part of her she had not known existed. The rest of the day passed in its usual tedious fashion. Beatrice practiced making bread under Aunt Margaret's critical eye, and while it was not perfect, at least it was edible. She cleaned the kitchen twice, helped prepare dinner which Aunt Margaret mostly cooked herself, and then spent the evening mending clothes by lamplight. That night, she lay in her small bed in the attic room and thought about the mountain man, Lucas Anderson. The name suited him somehow, strong and solid. She wondered what it must be like to live in the mountains, free from the constant criticism and expectations of town life. The next morning, Beatrice woke early to start breakfast. Aunt Margaret wanted eggs, bacon, and toast, a simple enough meal. But somehow, Beatrice managed to break all the yolks, burn the bacon, and char the toast. By the time Aunt Margaret came downstairs, the kitchen was a disaster. "Out!" her aunt commanded, her face red with fury. "Get out of my kitchen before you burn down the entire house. Go to the mercantile and purchase more eggs since you have destroyed our entire dozen, and some bacon as well. Perhaps the walk will clear your addled head." Grateful for the escape, Beatrice grabbed her bonnet and reticule and hurried out into the crisp morning air. Idaho City was just coming alive, with shopkeepers opening their doors and miners heading toward the hills with their tools. She made her way to the general store, trying to ignore the curious looks from passers-by. Inside the store, it was dim and crowded with merchandise. Barrels of flour and sugar lined one wall, while shelves held everything from canned goods to fabric to tools. Mr. Henderson stood behind the counter, weighing out supplies for a customer. Beatrice froze when she realized the customer was Lucas Anderson. Up close, he was even more impressive than he had been at a distance. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill half the store. His arms, bare below rolled-up sleeves, were corded with muscle, the kind that came from years of hard physical labor. His hands were large and calloused, capable hands that handled goods with surprising gentleness. His face was rugged, with deep-set eyes the color of storm clouds and sharp cheekbones that spoke of some native heritage somewhere in his lineage. "That should do it," Mr. Henderson was saying, tallying up the supplies. "Flour, salt, coffee, sugar, dried beans, bacon. You planning to stay up in those mountains all winter, Lucas?" "That is the plan," Lucas replied, and his voice was deep and rich, like distant thunder. "Do not expect to make it back down until spring thaw." "Well, you take care of yourself up there," Mr. Henderson said. "Those winters can be brutal." Lucas just nodded, paid for his supplies, and began loading them into a large pack. Beatrice tried to make herself small, not wanting to draw attention, but as she moved past him to reach the counter, she accidentally bumped into a shelf. A jar of preserved peaches teetered dangerously, and she gasped, reaching for it. Lucas's hand shot out, steadying the jar before it could fall. His hand briefly covered hers, warm and solid, and Beatrice felt a jolt go through her at the contact. She looked up into his face and found him watching her with those storm-gray eyes. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded once, then released the jar and turned back to his packing. Beatrice felt her cheeks burning as she approached Mr. Henderson. "A dozen eggs and 2 pounds of bacon, please," she said quietly. "Coming right up, Miss Ashford," Mr. Henderson said cheerfully. "How is your aunt doing?" "She is well, thank you," Beatrice lied, not wanting to air their troubles in public. As Mr. Henderson gathered her order, she was acutely aware of Lucas working behind her, the soft sounds of him organizing his supplies. She wondered what it would be like to talk to him, to ask him about life in the mountains, but she did not have the courage. Men like him probably had no time for foolish town girls who could not even cook a proper meal. Mr. Henderson wrapped her purchases, and Beatrice paid from the small allowance Aunt Margaret gave her. She was turning to leave when Lucas suddenly spoke. "You dropped this." She turned to find him holding out a lace handkerchief, one she had embroidered herself with small blue flowers. It must have fallen from her reticule when she had reached for her money. "Oh, thank you so much," she said, taking it from him. Their fingers brushed again, and again she felt that strange electricity. "I made it myself. The embroidery, I mean. I am quite good at sewing, even if I cannot cook to save my life." She immediately wanted to clap her hand over her mouth. Why had she said that? Lucas Anderson did not care about her failures in the kitchen, but instead of looking bored or dismissive, his expression softened slightly. "Cooking is not everything," he said simply. Before Beatrice could respond, Mr. Henderson called out to Lucas about a special order, and the moment was broken. She clutched her packages and hurried out of the store, her heart pounding in a way she did not quite understand. Over the next few days, Beatrice could not get Lucas Anderson out of her mind. She went about her chores mechanically, still ruining every meal she attempted, still enduring Aunt Margaret's constant criticism. But in her quiet moments, she thought about storm-gray eyes and gentle hands catching falling jars. "The church social is this Saturday," Aunt Margaret announced one evening. "You will wear your blue dress and you will be on your best behavior. There will be several eligible young men there, and I intend to see you properly introduced." Beatrice's heart sank. Aunt Margaret's idea of eligible young men usually meant the sons of her friends, boring boys who wanted docile wives to cook and clean and bear children. She had no interest in any of them, but she knew better than to argue. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather, cool and crisp with bright sunshine. The church social was held in the yard behind the small white church, with tables laden with food prepared by the town's best cooks. Beatrice had been forbidden from contributing anything to the meal after last year's disaster with the potato salad. She stood in her blue dress, feeling awkward and out of place as Aunt Margaret paraded her around like a prize cow. First there was Timothy Walsh, a banker's son with soft hands and a weak chin. Then came Harold Peterson, who worked at his father's feed store and talked endlessly about grain prices. Finally, there was Charles Mitchell, a lawyer's clerk who looked at Beatrice as if she were a piece of furniture he was considering purchasing. "She is a bit clumsy in the kitchen," Aunt Margaret was saying to Charles's mother, "but she comes from good stock, and she is quite skilled with a needle." Beatrice wanted to sink into the ground. She excused herself as politely as possible and fled to the edge of the gathering, near the fence that separated the church yard from the wild land beyond. She was fighting back tears of humiliation when she heard a familiar deep voice behind her. "Those socials are about as much fun as a toothache." She spun around to find Lucas Anderson leaning against a nearby tree, partially hidden in shadow. He was not dressed for the social, still in his buckskin clothing, and he looked completely out of place among the proper townspeople. "What are you doing here?" she asked, then flushed. "I apologize, that sounded rude. I just did not expect to see you at a church social." "I did not come for the social," Lucas said, moving out of the shadows. In the afternoon light, she could see the way his long hair caught the sun, dark with hints of auburn. "Needed to speak with the preacher about buying some land up in the high country. Saw you standing here looking like you wanted to bolt." "That obvious." Beatrice tried to smile, but it came out wobbly. "My aunt is trying to find me a husband. She thinks if she can just marry me off, I will be someone else's problem." Lucas studied her for a long moment. "You are not a problem." The simple statement, delivered in his quiet, certain way, made Beatrice's throat tighten with emotion. "You would not say that if you tasted my cooking. I cannot make anything right. I burn water, I ruin bread, I destroy perfectly good ingredients with alarming regularity. Aunt Margaret says no man will want to marry a woman who cannot feed him properly." "Your aunt talks too much," Lucas said bluntly, and Beatrice laughed despite herself. "She would be horrified to hear you say that. She is not here to hear it." Lucas glanced back toward the social, where Aunt Margaret was deep in conversation with several other matrons. "Do you want to take a walk? Get away from all this for a bit." Beatrice knew she should say no. It would be improper to walk alone with a man, especially one she barely knew. But something in Lucas's calm presence called to her, and she found herself nodding. They walked along the fence line, away from the noise and bustle of the social. Lucas moved with the easy grace of someone completely comfortable in his own skin, never rushed or uncertain. Beatrice found herself relaxing in his presence. "How long have you lived in the mountains?" she asked. "About 8 years now," Lucas replied. "Came west after the war, did not care for cities or towns much. Found a good spot up in the high country, built a cabin, been there ever since." "Do you not get lonely?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "But it is peaceful. No one telling me what to do or who to be, just me and the land and the animals. It suits me." They walked in comfortable silence for a while. Beatrice noticed how Lucas moved, always aware of his surroundings, his eyes scanning the landscape with the practiced ease of someone who lived by observation. "What is it like?" she asked suddenly. "Living up there in the mountains?" Lucas considered the question. "Hard sometimes. The winters are brutal and you have to be prepared for anything. But it is beautiful too. Wake up to sunrise over the peaks, have a whole valley to yourself. The air is clean, water runs clear and cold from snowmelt. You learn to be self-sufficient, to rely on your own skills." "It sounds wonderful," Beatrice said wistfully. "You would like it," Lucas said, and she looked at him in surprise. "How could you possibly know that?" "You have that same look I did when I lived in town," he said. "Like you are trapped in a life that does not fit you right. Like you are meant for something different." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. "I do feel trapped. Every day is the same. Cook, clean, so be told I am not good enough. I love my aunt, I am grateful she took me in when my parents died, but sometimes I feel like I am suffocating." "You should not have to be grateful for being made to feel small," Lucas said quietly. They had reached a small creek that ran behind the church property. Lucas gestured to a fallen log, and they sat together, watching the water flow past. Beatrice was acutely aware of how close he was, of the warmth radiating from his large frame. "Tell me about your cooking disasters," Lucas said, and there was a hint of amusement in his voice. Beatrice groaned. "Do we have to? I want to hear." So she told him, starting with the burnt biscuits and working backward through 3 years of kitchen catastrophes. She told him about the bread that came out like bricks, the soup that was somehow both burnt and watery, the pie that exploded in the oven. As she talked, she found herself laughing at the absurdity of it all, and Lucas listened with genuine interest. "Last week, I tried to make a roast chicken," she said. Aunt Margaret gave me very specific instructions. But somehow I got distracted reading a book, and when I remembered to check on it, the outside was black and the inside was still pink. Aunt Margaret said I was hopeless. "What book?" Lucas asked. Beatrice blinked at the unexpected question. What book were you reading that made you forget the chicken?" "Oh, it was a collection of naturalist writings about the American West. A traveling salesman left it at the mercantile, and Mr. Henderson let me borrow it. It had the most beautiful descriptions of the landscape, the animals, the changing seasons." She smiled at the memory. "I got lost in it. You like reading about nature. I love it," Beatrice admitted. "I have always wanted to see more of the wild country to understand how everything works together. But Aunt Margaret says such interests are not proper for a young lady." Lucas was quiet for a moment, then said, "I could use some help." "Help with what?" "Got a whole winter's worth of food to preserve before the first snow. Hunting, smoking meat, putting up vegetables. Could use an extra pair of hands." Beatrice stared at him. "Are you asking me to come to your mountain cabin?" "Just for a day or two," Lucas said. "You could see the mountains, learn about how food preservation works in the wild. Might give you a different perspective on cooking." "Aunt Margaret would never allow it. Tell her I need help and will pay for your time. Tell her it is respectable work." Beatrice's heart was racing. The proper thing to do would be to refuse, to go back to the social and let Aunt Margaret introduce her to more boring suitors. But when she looked into Lucas's storm-gray eyes, she saw genuine interest, genuine respect. He was not looking at her as a burden or a failure. He was offering her an adventure. "All right," she heard herself say, "I will ask her." Lucas's face broke into a smile and Beatrice caught her breath. He was handsome when he was serious, but when he smiled, he was devastating. They walked back to the social together, and Beatrice felt eyes on them as they approached. Aunt Margaret immediately bore down on her like a ship in full sail. "Where have you been? I have been looking everywhere for you. And who is this?" "Lucas Anderson, madam," Lucas said, touching his hat politely. "I was just speaking with your niece about some work." "Work?" Aunt Margaret's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "I live up in the mountains, need help preserving food for winter. Heard Miss Ashford here is skilled with her hands. Thought she might be willing to help with some of the detail work. Would pay fair wages, of course." Aunt Margaret looked between them, clearly torn. On one hand, she did not approve of Beatrice spending time with a rough mountain man. On the other, the mention of wages was tempting, and having Beatrice out of the house for a few days might be a relief. "It would be entirely proper," Lucas added. "She would have her own room and I would make sure she was safely returned to town." "How long would this take?" Aunt Margaret asked. 2, maybe 3 days. Just need help with some preserving and organizing supplies." Aunt Margaret pursed her lips, thinking. Finally, she said, "Very well. But she is to be treated with complete respect, Mr. Anderson. Any hint of impropriety and I will have the sheriff after you." "Understood, madam," Lucas said gravely. It was settled that Beatrice would leave early Monday morning. She spent Sunday in a state of nervous excitement, packing a small bag with her oldest work dress and trying not to think too hard about what she was doing. Aunt Margaret lectured her repeatedly about proper behavior, but Beatrice barely heard a word. Monday morning dawned clear and cool. Lucas arrived at the house just after sunrise, his big bay horse saddled and ready. He had a second horse with him, a gentle-looking mare. "Morning," he said when Beatrice came out with her bag. "Ready, ready," she confirmed, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The ride up into the mountains was unlike anything Beatrice had ever experienced. They left the dusty streets of Idaho City behind and climbed into country that grew increasingly wild and beautiful. Pine forests rose around them, thick and fragrant. Streams rushed cold and clear over rocks. Above them, the peaks rose sharp and majestic against the blue sky. Lucas led the way, occasionally pointing out landmarks or wildlife. Beatrice saw a deer with her fawn, an eagle soaring overhead, and once in the distance, what Lucas said was a bear. He spoke little, but she found his silence comfortable rather than awkward. They stopped at midday beside a rushing stream to let the horses drink. Lucas pulled out some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag, offering half to Beatrice. "Not fancy, but it fills the belly," he said. Beatrice bit into the jerky, which was tough but flavorful. "Did you make this?" "Smoked it myself last fall." "It is good," she said honestly. Lucas looked pleased. "Making jerky is not hard, just needs time and patience. I will show you how if you want." They continued climbing into the afternoon. The air grew thinner and cooler, and Beatrice pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Just as she was beginning to wonder how much farther they had to go, they crested a ridge, and Lucas pointed down into a valley below. "There." Beatrice followed his gesture and caught her breath. Nestled in the valley was a cabin, solid and well built from logs. It sat beside a small lake that reflected the surrounding peaks like a mirror. Smoke rose from the chimney, though Lucas had been gone for days. "I banked the fire before I left," he explained, seeing her puzzled look. "Should still be some coals to work with." They rode down into the valley, and as they drew closer, Beatrice could see that Lucas's cabin was more than just a rough shelter. It was a real home, with a covered porch, shuttered windows, and what looked like a small barn behind it. A garden plot, now mostly harvested, sat to one side. Lucas helped her dismount, his large hands steady on her waist, then led the horses to the barn while Beatrice stood and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. The valley was breathtaking, surrounded by towering pines and rugged peaks. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke and wild growing things. She could hear the distant sound of water, birds calling, wind in the trees. It was so different from town, so alive and free. "What do you think?" Lucas asked, coming up beside her. "It is the most beautiful place I have ever seen," Beatrice said honestly. Lucas's face softened. "Come on, I will show you inside." The cabin was a single large room with a sleeping loft above. It was surprisingly neat and well organized, with a stone fireplace at one end, a table and chairs, a cooking area and shelves lined with supplies. Furs covered the floor and more hung on the walls for insulation. A ladder led up to the loft. "You will take the loft," Lucas said. "I will sleep down here." "I cannot take your bed," Beatrice protested. "It is not a discussion," Lucas said firmly. "You are a guest, and you will sleep in the bed." Beatrice recognized the tone of voice that said arguing was pointless. She climbed the ladder to peek at the loft and found it cozy, with a thick mattress covered in furs and quilts. A small window looked out over the lake. When she climbed back down, Lucas had revived the fire and was setting a pot of water to boil. "Thought we could have some stew tonight." "Already made, just needs heating." "You made stew?" Beatrice asked, surprised. "Man has to eat," Lucas said with a shrug. "Living alone, you learn to cook or you starve." Beatrice watched as he moved around the kitchen area with easy competence, adding wood to the fire, stirring the pot, cutting bread from a loaf that looked perfectly golden and delicious. Nothing burned, nothing spilled, everything seemed to work exactly as it should. "How do you do it?" she asked. "How do you make it look so easy?" Lucas glanced at her. "Practice, mostly. And not worrying too much about making it perfect. Food does not have to be fancy, it just has to be nourishing." When the stew was ready, Lucas ladled it into 2 bowls and brought them to the table. Beatrice took a cautious bite and was amazed. It was delicious, rich and hearty with tender meat and vegetables. "This is wonderful," she said. "It is just stew," Lucas said, but he looked pleased. They ate in comfortable silence, and afterward, Beatrice insisted on washing the dishes. Lucas showed her where he kept his water supply, a spring that fed into a small cistern near the cabin, and where to dispose of waste water. Everything had a system, a purpose. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, they sat on the porch together. Lucas whittled a piece of wood while Beatrice simply watched the light change across the valley. She had never felt so peaceful. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said quietly. "You are welcome," Lucas replied. That night, Beatrice climbed into the loft bed and burrowed under the warm furs. She could hear Lucas moving around below, banking the fire, preparing for sleep. She felt safe here in a way she had not felt in a long time, protected by the mountains and by the quiet strength of the man downstairs. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. She climbed down the ladder to find Lucas cooking breakfast over the fire. "Morning," he said. "Hope you slept well." "Better than I have in years," Beatrice admitted. Breakfast was bacon, eggs, and fresh bread, all perfectly cooked. Beatrice watched Lucas work, trying to understand what he did differently than she did. He seemed to have a sense of timing, of knowing when to flip the bacon or remove the eggs from heat. He did not fuss or worry. He just cooked. After breakfast, Lucas took her outside to show her his preserving setup. He had meat hanging in a smokehouse, vegetables stored in a cool root cellar dug into the hillside, and jars of preserved fruits and vegetables lined up on shelves. "The key to surviving winter up here is preparation," Lucas explained. "Come October, I need to have enough food stored to last until April or May. Cannot count on being able to hunt when the snow gets deep." He showed her how he smoked meat, how he stored root vegetables in sand to keep them fresh, how he made preserves from wild berries. Beatrice was fascinated, asking question after question. This was so different from following recipes in Aunt Margaret's kitchen. This was about understanding food, about respecting the work that went into creating meals. "Want to try making something?" Lucas asked. Beatrice's stomach clenched with familiar anxiety. "I will just ruin it." "Cannot ruin jerky," Lucas said. "Worst case, it is a little too dry or not dry enough. Not the end of the world." He showed her how to slice venison into thin strips, how to season it with salt and spices, how to hang it in the smokehouse. His hands were patient as he guided her, never critical when she cut the pieces unevenly or used too much salt. "There," he said when they finished hanging the last strip. "Now it just needs time." They worked together throughout the day, and Beatrice found herself relaxing. Lucas never made her feel foolish or incompetent. When she made mistakes, he simply showed her how to correct them without judgment. It was so different from Aunt Margaret's constant criticism. That evening, Lucas suggested she try making biscuits. Beatrice felt her anxiety spike, but something about the calm, peaceful setting made her willing to try. "I will help," Lucas said. "Walk me through what you usually do." Beatrice started mixing the dough, explaining each step. Lucas watched carefully, and when she started to add too much water, he gently caught her hand. "Try a little less," he suggested. "Biscuit dough should be just barely sticky." She adjusted, and the dough came together better than it ever had before. Lucas showed her how to pat it out and cut the biscuits, then helped her judge the oven temperature by holding his hand over the Dutch oven. "Should be about right," he said. "Give them maybe 12 minutes." Beatrice set the biscuits in the oven, her heart pounding. She was sure they would come out burnt or raw or somehow both, but when Lucas checked them 12 minutes later, they were golden brown and perfect. "You made these," Lucas said, setting them on the table. "All I did was give advice." Beatrice stared at the biscuits in disbelief. She had made them, they were actually good. When she took a bite, it was fluffy and delicious, and she felt tears spring to her eyes. "I did it," she whispered. "I actually did it." "You always could," Lucas said quietly. "You just needed someone to believe in you instead of expecting you to fail." Beatrice looked at him, this strong, quiet man who had shown her more kindness in 2 days than her aunt had in 3 years, and felt something shift in her chest. She was falling for him, she realized. Falling hard and fast for Lucas Anderson with his storm-gray eyes and gentle hands and unwavering faith in her abilities. The next day was their last together, before Lucas would take her back to town. They spent it hiking around the valley, with Lucas pointing out edible plants, animal tracks, and the best spots for fishing. Beatrice absorbed everything like a sponge, hungry for knowledge and for his company. They stopped by the lake in the late afternoon, sitting on the shore and watching the water ripple in the breeze. Beatrice knew she should be thinking about going back to Aunt Margaret's house, back to her old life, but she could not bear the thought. "I do not want to leave," she said suddenly. Lucas turned to look at her. "You can stay longer if you want. Aunt Margaret would never allow it. She is probably already composing lectures about proper behavior." Beatrice picked up a pebble and tossed it into the lake. "I wish I could just stay here forever. Why do not you?" Beatrice laughed, but it came out bitter. "I cannot just abandon my responsibilities. Aunt Margaret took me in when I had nowhere else to go. I owe her." "You do not owe anyone your unhappiness," Lucas said. "It is not that simple." "It could be." Lucas shifted to face her fully. "Stay here." "With me?" Beatrice's heart stopped. "What? Stay here," Lucas repeated. "I know it is fast, I know we barely know each other, but I feel something with you, Beatrice. Something I have never felt before. You belong in these mountains. I can see it in your eyes every time you look at the peaks. You come alive out here." Lucas, Beatrice did not know what to say. Her heart was screaming yes, but her practical mind was listing all the reasons it was impossible. "I am not asking you to decide right now," Lucas said. "I am just asking you to think about it. I will take you back to town tomorrow if that is what you want. But know that there is a place for you here, with me, if you want it." That night, Beatrice lay in the loft bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. Could she really stay? Could she build a life here with Lucas in this beautiful wild valley? What about Aunt Margaret? What about all her things in town? What would people say? But as she asked herself these questions, she realized something. She did not care what people said. She did not want her things from town. And Aunt Margaret, for all that she had provided a roof over Beatrice's head, had never truly cared for her. She had been a duty, a burden, nothing more. What Lucas was offering was real care, real respect, real partnership. In just 3 days, he had shown her more kindness than Aunt Margaret had in 3 years. He believed in her abilities, encouraged her curiosity, and made her feel valued for who she was rather than what she could provide. She thought about going back to Idaho City, to the endless cycle of failure and criticism, to being paraded before boring suitors who wanted a cook, and a maid rather than a partner. Then she thought about staying here, learning from Lucas, exploring the mountains, building a life in this incredible valley. The choice, when she really examined it, was not difficult at all. The next morning, Beatrice climbed down from the loft to find Lucas already awake, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. He looked up when she descended, and she saw hope and fear warring in his eyes. "I want to stay," she said without preamble. "If the offer is still open, I want to stay here with you." Lucas stood so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. "You are certain?" "More certain than I have been about anything in my life." He crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. Beatrice gasped at the contact, at the feeling of being surrounded by his warmth and strength. When he pulled back to look at her face, she saw joy written clearly across his rugged features. "I will make you happy," he promised. "I swear it." "You already have," Beatrice said, and then, daringly, she stood on her toes and kissed him. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but it quickly deepened as Lucas's arms tightened around her. Beatrice had been kissed before, chased pecks from boys at church socials, but nothing like this. This was fire and promise and coming home all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably tell your aunt," he said. "She is going to be furious." "I can handle furious." They rode back to Idaho City together that afternoon, and Beatrice felt as though she was seeing the town with new eyes. Everything looked smaller somehow, less important. Her real life was waiting in the mountains. Aunt Margaret was indeed furious. She railed at Beatrice for her ingratitude, her impropriety, her foolishness. She called Lucas a savage and a corrupting influence. She predicted doom and disaster and starvation. "You cannot even cook," she shrieked. "You will starve to death up in those mountains." "I can cook," Beatrice said calmly. "I just could not cook the way you wanted me to. There is a difference." "You are making the biggest mistake of your life." "No," Beatrice said. "I am making the first real choice of my life." She packed her few belongings, her books and clothes and the embroidery she had made. Aunt Margaret refused to speak to her, sitting stiff-backed in her chair with her lips pressed into a thin line. Beatrice felt a pang of guilt, but it was distant, muted. She was choosing herself, choosing happiness, and that felt right. Lucas helped her load her things onto the pack horse, and they prepared to leave. But before they could depart, Mr. Henderson from the general store came hurrying up. "Heard you are heading up to the mountains for good, Miss Ashford," he said, slightly out of breath. "That is correct," Beatrice replied. "Well, before you go, I wanted to give you this." He pressed her borrowed book about the American West into her hands. "Consider it a wedding gift if there is to be a wedding." "There will be," Lucas said firmly, and Beatrice felt warmth spread through her chest. "Then you will need this too," Mr. Henderson said, producing a small book. "It is a cookbook, but not like the ones you are used to. It is all about frontier cooking, making do with what you have, cooking over an open fire. Thought it might be useful." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," Beatrice said, genuinely touched. "That is very kind." They left Idaho City as the sun was beginning to set, and Beatrice did not look back. Her future was ahead of her in the mountains, with the man who had shown her what it meant to be valued and respected. The ride back to the valley seemed shorter this time, perhaps because Beatrice knew where they were going. They arrived after dark, and Lucas lit lanterns to guide them inside. The cabin felt like coming home. Over the following weeks, Beatrice settled into mountain life. She learned to cook over the open fire and in the Dutch oven, and with Lucas's patient instruction, she found that she actually enjoyed it. Without the pressure of Aunt Margaret's expectations, without the fear of failure, cooking became a creative act rather than a source of anxiety. She made bread that rose perfectly golden. She cooked stews that were rich and flavorful. She even managed to roast a wild turkey that Lucas brought home from hunting, and it was tender and delicious. Every success built her confidence, and Lucas praised her efforts warmly. "This is the best meal I have had in years," he would say, or "You have a real talent for this." Beatrice learned other skills too. Lucas taught her to identify edible plants, to track animals, to read the weather in the clouds and the wind. She learned to chop wood, to maintain the fire, to smoke meat and preserve vegetables. She learned to shoot a rifle, though she was not very good at it, and to fish in the cold lake. At night, they would sit together by the fire, and Lucas would hold her close while they talked about their pasts, their dreams, their plans for the future. Beatrice told him about her parents, about growing up in a loving home before fever took them both. Lucas told her about fighting in the war, about losing friends and brothers in arms, about needing to find peace in the wilderness. "I never thought I would want to share this place with anyone," Lucas admitted one night, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. "But having you here, it is like the valley came alive, like it was always meant to be this way." "I feel the same," Beatrice said. "I feel like I was sleepwalking through my life before, and now I am finally awake." They were married in October by the traveling preacher who made circuits through the mountain communities. It was a simple ceremony with only a few neighboring trappers and homesteaders as witnesses, but Beatrice had never been happier. Lucas spoke his vows in his deep, steady voice, promising to love and protect her for all his days, and Beatrice promised the same in return. Their wedding night was spent in the loft bed, with moonlight streaming through the small window and the sounds of the wilderness outside. Lucas was gentle and patient, and Beatrice discovered a new kind of joy in the physical expression of their love. Afterward, she lay in his arms, feeling safe and cherished and exactly where she belonged. Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in early November. Beatrice watched in wonder as the valley transformed into a white wonderland, the lake freezing solid and the pine trees heavy with snow. The cabin was warm and cozy, well stocked with food and firewood, and she and Lucas settled into a comfortable routine. They spent long winter evenings together, Lucas carving or repairing equipment while Beatrice read aloud from her books or worked on embroidery. They cooked meals together, often experimenting with new combinations of their stored ingredients. Beatrice made a venison stew with dried herbs that Lucas declared the best thing he had ever tasted. She baked bread studded with dried berries, roasted root vegetables with wild onions, made preserves from the jars of fruit they had put up. "She cannot cook anything right, your aunt said," Lucas remarked one evening after a particularly delicious meal of rabbit braised with vegetables. "She was dead wrong." "I think I just needed the right teacher," Beatrice said, leaning against his shoulder, "and the right motivation." "What motivation is that, cooking for someone I love?" Beatrice said simply. "Someone who appreciates the effort rather than expects perfection." Lucas kissed the top of her head. "Everything you make is perfect to me." In December, a massive blizzard trapped them in the cabin for nearly 2 weeks. The snow piled high against the walls and the wind howled like a living thing. But inside, Beatrice and Lucas were warm and safe. They made love by firelight, told stories, played cards, and simply enjoyed each other's company. Beatrice had never been so happy to be snowed in. When the storm finally broke and Lucas could dig them out, Beatrice helped him check on the animals in the barn and ensure their supplies were still secure. Everything was fine, a testament to Lucas's careful planning and preparation. As winter deepened, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not been certain until she missed her second monthly course and began feeling queasy in the mornings. When she told Lucas, his face transformed with joy. "A baby," he breathed, placing his large hand gently on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Lucas said, pulling her into his arms. "You have given me everything, Beatrice. A home, a family, a reason to look forward to tomorrow. I love you more than I can say." "I love you too," Beatrice whispered against his chest. "So much." They spent the rest of the winter preparing for the baby. Lucas built a cradle from pine wood, carving it with intricate designs of forest animals. Beatrice sewed tiny clothes and blankets. her skilled fingers creating beautiful garments from the fabric Lucas had brought up from town on his last trip before winter closed the passes. The baby, a boy they named Samuel, was born in late April as the snow was melting and the valley was coming back to life. The birth was attended by a midwife from a neighboring homestead, a tough older woman named Mrs. Callahan, who made the trek through the muddy trails specifically to help. "Strong lungs on this one," Mrs. Callahan said approvingly as Samuel wailed lustily. "He is going to be as big as his father." Beatrice held her son and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. Lucas sat beside her on the bed, his eyes suspiciously bright as he gazed at their child. "He is perfect," Lucas said hoarsely. "Just like his mother, the years that followed were full and happy." Beatrice and Lucas raised Samuel in the mountain valley, teaching him to love and respect the wilderness. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Rose who arrived 2 years after Samuel, and another boy named James 3 years after that. The cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family, with Lucas building an addition that gave them more sleeping space and a proper kitchen. Beatrice became known throughout the mountain communities as an excellent cook, and she often helped new settlers learn how to preserve food and cook over open fires. She never forgot the struggle of learning to cook under criticism, and she made sure to teach with patience and encouragement. Lucas thrived as a father, taking the children on hikes through the mountains, teaching them to track and fish and read the signs of nature. He was protective but not smothering, strong but never harsh. Beatrice would watch him with their children and feel her heart swell with love. Occasionally, they would make trips down to Idaho City for supplies. The first few times, Beatrice worried about encountering Aunt Margaret, but it turned out her aunt had moved to live with a sister in Montana not long after Beatrice left. Mr. Henderson always greeted them warmly at the general store and made sure to have books set aside for Beatrice and candy for the children. "You were right to choose the mountains," Mr. Henderson told her once. "I have never seen you look so happy." "I am happy," Beatrice confirmed. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." On their 10th anniversary, Lucas surprised Beatrice by taking her back to the spot by the lake where he had first asked her to stay. The children were with Mrs. Callahan for the day, giving them rare time alone. "I wanted to tell you something," Lucas said, taking her hands in his. "That day I saw you in the general store, the first time we met, I felt something change. Like the world shifted and everything was suddenly in color instead of gray. I did not know then that I was looking at my future, at the woman who would make my life complete." "Lucas," Beatrice said, her voice thick with emotion. "Let me finish," he said gently. "These 10 years with you have been the best of my life. Watching you bloom from a scared, criticized girl into the strong, confident woman you are now. Seeing you become an amazing mother to our children, sharing this valley with you, building a life together. There is nothing I would change, Beatrice, not a single moment." "I feel the same way," Beatrice said, tears streaming down her face. "You saved me, Lucas. You showed me that I was worth more than I thought, that I could do things I never dreamed possible. You gave me a home and a family and a love I never knew existed." They kissed there by the lake, just as they had on that first morning when Beatrice had chosen to stay, and it felt like coming full circle. Everything had led to this moment, to this life, to this perfect happiness. As the years continued to pass, the Anderson family became a fixture in the mountain community. Their children grew strong and capable, inheriting Lucas's love of the wilderness and Beatrice's curiosity and creativity. Samuel became an expert tracker. Rose showed a talent for healing and herb lore, and James inherited his mother's skill with a needle and his father's strength. Beatrice never forgot those early days of failure in Aunt Margaret's kitchen. But instead of being a source of shame, they became a reminder of how far she had come. She would sometimes tell her children the story of how she once could not cook anything right, and how their father had eaten everything she made with joy, teaching her that the measure of a meal was not perfection, but the love with which it was prepared. "Your father believed in me when no one else did," she would say. "He saw past my failures to the person I could become. That is the greatest gift anyone can give." Lucas and Beatrice grew old together in their mountain valley, watching their children marry and have children of their own. The cabin expanded again to host family gatherings, and the valley filled with the sounds of grandchildren playing and exploring. On cool evenings, Lucas and Beatrice would still sit on the porch together, watching the sunset paint the peaks in shades of gold and pink. Lucas's hair had gone silver, and Beatrice's once dark locks were now white, but their love had only deepened with time. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucas asked one evening when they were both in their 70s. "Leaving town, choosing this life?" Beatrice took his weathered hand in hers and squeezed. "Not for a single second. This life, this family, you are everything I never knew I needed. Aunt Margaret was wrong about so many things, but she was most wrong about me. I can cook, I can survive, I can thrive. And I did it all with you by my side." "We did it together," Lucas corrected, bringing her hand to his lips. "Everything we built as partners." "Yes," Beatrice agreed, leaning her head on his broad shoulder. "Partners, lovers, friends, forever." As the sun dipped below the peaks, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Beatrice reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the scared, criticized girl burning biscuits in her aunt's kitchen to the confident woman who had raised a family and built a life in the wilderness, she had traveled so far. And through it all, Lucas had been there, believing in her, supporting her, loving her with his whole heart. Their story had begun with burnt biscuits and harsh words, but it had become a tale of love, faith, and the courage to choose one's own path. In the end, Aunt Margaret's criticism had been a strange kind of gift, driving Beatrice toward the life she was meant to live and the man she was meant to love. "I love you, Lucas Anderson," Beatrice whispered into the gathering darkness. "I love you too, Beatrice Anderson," Lucas replied. "Today, tomorrow, and forever." And in their mountain valley, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built together, they sat in perfect contentment as the stars came out one by one, lighting the night sky like promises kept and dreams fulfilled. Their love story, which had begun with something as simple as food prepared with joy instead of judgment, had grown into a legacy that would be told around family fires for generations, to come a testament to the power of belief, acceptance, and choosing love over criticism every single time.